there's something that came to my mind,
Yeah.
and I spent 16 years in New York City
Yeah.
as a young adult, and I absolutely loved it and hated it at the same time. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, that's an understatement, yeah.
I've had great opportunity to work at MTV Networks for 3.5 years, and so when I think about black, white, or the color of somebody's skin, it doesn't even resonate at this point for me. In other words, there's no difference. The only difference that I have is how I think and feel on the inside. And if I am able to tap into everything is the same and everyone is just another person, maybe that other person is an extension of myself, regardless of what they call race. I love that, right? Race, but we think about race, but do we think of human race? And black culture, what I've seen and being living in New York is amazing. There's a lot there, and it's a very fertile ground. It's been for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and you didn't grow up, you weren't like, because you're not black, not be affected by it, and not be participating in it, and not be like, So that's one of the things that drove me, was like, it's super important to, it is super important to have a place for black people to tell their story and speak their truth and whatever, but as a black, as a half black person, and as black people, we're like, no, wait, we have a lot of white people involved in our story, actually.
Of course.
So for me, it was very comfortable. I was like, no, this dude, he can definitely, knowing your background, knowing, we talked about New York City and all the crazy stuff, so many similarities within our backgrounds and within our cultures, which just kind of transcended the racial issue. I was astonished to find out how much time we spent in New York, actually.
I remember,
Because clearly the fashion thing you didn't take that with you. You were like, no, I'm keeping this.
This is Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, you're like, I'm good with this. So it's kind of interesting. You never know. I think we said that about a month ago when we started that, it's about in some level for me, this residency is also about trying to collaborate and challenge assumptions on different levels, whether it's methodologies or art or personal stories, that kind of stuff. So it's really cool to have you involved on that level, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's a token experiment. So I'm going to explain now about what we did, why we did it, and kind of also try to explain about the Donji estate and where that fits in and all the things that are going on there. So what we decided to do is Gary Vandergreek, who is someone that we grew up with in New York City, who is an amazing photographer, who has he's very well known for his street culture photography from early 90s and, just New York City street culture, some skate culture, but more New York City street culture. And he has some of the best photos of our friend who we grew up with, who is this person who gave you the photo. So the funny part, here's the thing about the experiment was, I handed you the photo, right? Gary gave me the photo, and then I gave you the photo, and I didn't tell him anything. I didn't tell you anything about the person. You don't know who the person is. He's never heard of the person. He's never seen the person. No background to the person. And I didn't provide that to you, right?
Wasn't provided. I asked.
Yeah, you tried. You're like, I'm going to try to get around this. So what I did was I literally just gave you the photograph, and I was like, see what you feel about this person.
Yeah.
Right? Do you want to, talk to us about that whole process, and that ended up with this, and then, then we can get into it.
Yeah. Well, Stephanie gave me the photograph from Gary Vandergreek, and I didn't know who the person was. I was very interested to find out, so I questioned her. I gave her 20 questions, and how did you get the photo, and who do you know the photo, and a lot of stuff about, because I usually work from the symbolic use of materials, and this is a symbolic use of materials, which we'll get to in a second. But I also think of the symbolism behind the eyes of a person, So I wanted to know what was that person about. And the more that she resisted, the more that I kept seeing in the photograph movement. And I was looking at the photograph and thinking, you know, what's my next step? Using that first higher thought creation, my method, meditative, allow the first thought, higher thought to rise, and I kept seeing movement. Movement. There's something about, as if when I was in New York and I was on either I think it was the N or the R train, and the R would come by, and I'm inside the train, I'm looking through the windows, and I would see a painting that's on the wall in the tunnel.
Yes.
And the painting, as the train moves, the painting would go by and animate. You could see something within that painting. And then another train would come by the opposite direction and obscure the view. And then you would see it again. Or sometimes I'd want to see it and not see it because another train was there on my next trip. And that's the feeling that I was receiving from looking at the original photograph. And that dictated my move. Okay, this photograph has to be slatted, so to speak, slatted or cut up, just like looking through a subway window.
Yeah, so interesting. What's interesting about that, obviously, so not everybody knows who this person is, but this was done because it's a personal, you know, we have several of us, we have a personal relationships with this person, right, who he has passed away. Talking about street culture and all the different influences within the cultures. He's someone who was very impacting on street culture and fashion culture and just, you know, oh my gosh, all the like urban culture sort of things. So, you know, his story, his persona, his likeness, his everything has been kind of splashed internationally all over the place. Used for all kinds of different purposes, different means, some good, some not so good. And that happens to a lot of our heroes, doesn't it? These guys who are working from a natural place, from a personal place, just being who they are in their world and making authentic decisions. There's a lot of sometimes outside forces that come and try to exploit or shape or, you know, take advantage of that stuff. So for me, it was super important to say, okay, like I want to honor this person too. This is a person that meant something to me. And a period of time that, like, you know, for many of us meant a lot to all of us, but it has been so manipulated and changed and manhandled. So part of that, the fun for me was to just be like, let's just see what you're a completely clean filter. Like you don't know anything about this stuff. And I was like, that's amazing. It's hard to find somebody who could say that. Like an artist who like literally knows nothing about this guy is difficult to find. So that was beautiful for me because obviously, you know, this whole thing with the movement is interesting because, you know, he was like one of the best, or became one of the most famous urban, like what they call street skateboarders, right? So, I mean, in New York City, you see them, they're just in the streets, they're everywhere. They're hanging on to cabs, hanging on to trucks, like they're just kind of similar to the Messengers. They're like on the bikes that were like kind of like in the 80s. These guys then became just wild in the streets on the skateboards, right? So it's fun for me to look at it because it feels like, you know, you see him moving through the streets. And the other thing that someone pointed out yesterday, which is interesting because it looks like a vert ramp, but he wasn't a vert skater, but it's still interesting because for sure we did, like they had it could still be some kind of like street ramp or something. Like you literally built a ramp. So that's really crazy. Yeah, I mean, the street skaters could still do that kind of stuff, but it wasn't their big thing, right? The layers are interesting. And then he had to go and get deep with it and get extra with it, of course. Because then what did you do? You were like, I need soil.
Oh, yes, yeah. So what I work, another method I like to use is a symbolic use of materials.
Yeah.
So sometimes taking a very piece of that person, that thing, that influencing object, and put it directly into the piece and apply it in the piece. Or sometimes I will use a material which brings on a thought or a feeling of that particular essence. So in other words, if I cut glass, well, cut glass is different than broken glass.
Right.
Broken glass means something else. Usually you don't want to touch broken glass, right? So I may use something like that, or twine, where twine is a tethering between one thing and another, or it could be wrapped up and made into a net to capture something. Those are the symbolism I like to use in my symbolic use of materials. And with this, and can I bring that camera over just to show? I got it. I see it. Yeah. Oh yeah, pull it right up. Well, here you go.
And I think you took a video, which I also posted. I think we have posted on the Instagram. So if you want to see the close-up, it's actually quite cool. He's got the different layers of movement going on.
So here in the back is soil. This is soil from underneath his window from New York City. And the interesting part is I was feeling so New York about it and thinking about the subway window that I asked Stephanie, since she was in New York at the time, I said, is this person, even though I don't know who it is he from New York? And she said yes. And I said, can you get me New York soil? And she did. And she took it a step further. She didn't only just get the soil from New York City, but she took it directly from underneath his window, from his yard, from this particular person. And that to me,
that was mind-blowing.
it energizes the piece.
Yeah.
And it energizes the piece, not just in a symbolic way, but also a very spiritual, almost shamanistic way to me. Because people of different culture, my friends that are in New Mexico, my native friends that are in New Mexico, they would understand this, understand the sacredness of place.
Right.
And wow, the
Right.
sacredness of place to me is so important to my heart.
Yes.
And
That's
so
interesting. Yeah.
that's what's happening here, is the sacredness of
Yeah,
place.
and so it just, because I didn't know he was gonna take it there. I just handed him a photo, right? And I was like, see what happens, see what you do. And then he took it there to this, he's like, I need soil from where this person's from. And then I happened to be downtown, in New York City downtown, with, God bless him, Ivan Perez, who literally knew exactly where to go to get the soil. And actually had to be kind of supportive to me because it really was quite heavy. That kind of was really quite a heavy thing to go do with him. And like,
That's the
I
simplicity.
hadn't been back there since this person passed away. So it actually, I mean, we're doing this to make, we're like making these pieces of art to tell a story and like a personal story, but then you even took it to like a much more personal level that I was like, whoa, I didn't even expect it to be that deep, like that got deep for me, like actually. To where I think like I almost didn't even want to do it.
Wow.
So, but so now you look at it and you're like, okay, wow, like you really, there's, even, you don't even know who he is, you don't have any preconceptions about it, but you have helped us tell the story of this Black American who has had a very beautiful and tragic at the same time impact globally on street culture. And even so the downtown culture that we're from, that was very, very difficult and very crazy. You kind of brought something back to it for us and made it, it's kind of revitalized it in a beautiful way. Like it's, I think you would call that an homage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it is a really cool homage, which I think, irrespective of your race, I didn't need to get a Black artist to do that. Like I needed to have an open-minded artist to do that and a skillful artist to do that. Even I, as a Black person, I may not have done as good a job of telling his story, the appropriate parts of the story that you received. Because I have so much in my head about what happened with this person, right? That brings us also super interesting. We're gonna come back to that and loop you in.